What do you see in this photo? Just a bunch of spotlights converging on a single point in the sky. What are they shining on? Is there anything there? Would your opinion change if I told you it was from a possible World War II battle that unfolded above US soil? Between February 24th and the 25th of 1942, a state of panic seized Los Angeles, California for 12 hours. From 7:18 the night before to 7:21 the next morning, most of the population, including military personnel, believed that an aerial assault force had launched an attack over America's largest West Coast city. When the smoke cleared, more than 1,400 anti-aircraft shells had been fired, leaving several vehicles and buildings damaged by their fragments. The fighting also cost 5 civilians their lives. 3 died in automobile accidents, 2 from cardiac arrest. The whole event became known as the infamous Los Angeles Air Raid, or more popularly, the Battle of Los Angeles. And to this day, no one has ever definitively explained what everybody was firing at in the sky. Now, earlier that day, the Office of Naval Intelligence issued a warning suggesting that a Japanese attack on the continental United States was imminent. When strange lights appeared above sensitive locations the evening of February 24th, authorities raised the initial alert, but it was lifted at 10:23 p.m. Everyone showed only a few hours of peace, however, and around 2 in the morning on February 25th, several radar picked up an unidentified object above the Pacific, about 120 miles from making landfall in Los Angeles. Personnel tracked it until it came within several miles of the coast. Air raid sirens began blaring at 2:25 a.m., sending wardens to their post amidst a citywide blackout. 51 minutes later, gunners with the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade spotted something in the air and, believing that they had made contact with the enemy, unleashed 12.8-pound anti-aircraft shells and 50 caliber machine gun rounds into the sky. Other units followed suit. Everyone involved was convinced that enemy aircraft were invading US airspace, ready to launch an attack. The firing continued on and off until 4:14. And by 7:21, the blackout order was lifted and the military issued an all-clear signal. Despite the bombardment, no enemy artillery dropped from the sky, nor was a single aircraft downed, at least not officially. Historically speaking, this reaction was understandable. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor took place just over 2 months prior, setting everyone on the West Coast on edge. It seemed like a Japanese invasion might be a real possibility, if not a full-fledged assault. It was entirely likely that another air raid, this time targeting the mainland, might happen at any moment. In late 1941 and early 1942, the military quickly installed anti-aircraft guns and bunkers all along the western seaboard. As a part of this preparedness operation, they primed the civilian population for an attack, conducting regular air raid drills and frequently issuing mandatory blackouts and radio silence whenever a credible threat manifested. Tensions amped up even further just 1 day before the Battle of Los Angeles. On February 23, 1942, the Japanese submarine I-17 would surface off the coast of Santa Barbara and opened fire on the Elwood oil field in Goleta. While damage to the facility was minimal, it did illustrate how vulnerable California might be to an attack. With everyone's attention focused across the Pacific, very few ever entertained the possibility of invasion from somewhere much, much farther away. Because of the anxiety circulating through the population, the Battle of Los Angeles caused an incredible amount of panic the following evening. Mass hysteria swept through the city. Many residents were convinced that Japanese forces had descended upon LA. Now, among them was 9-year-old Ralph Blum, who grew up to be a successful author. In 1998, he would share his memory of that night, saying, "It sounded like the Japanese were bombing Beverly Hills. There were sirens, searchlights, even anti-aircraft guns firing away into the skies over Los Angeles. My father had been a balloon observation man in World War I and he knew big guns when he heard them. He ordered my mother to take my baby sisters to the underground projection room, while he and I went out onto the upstairs balcony. What a scene! It was after 3 in the morning, searchlights probed the western sky, tracers streamed upward, the racket was terrific. While Rolf didn't see what the military was targeting, many others did. It is estimated that hundreds of thousands of witnesses saw something that night. Some described an unidentified, slow-moving object, resembling a blimp or balloon. Other civilians reported up to 25 objects in the air. In fact, Peter Jenkins, editor of the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, claimed that he could clearly see the V formation of about 25 silvery planes overhead moving slowly across the sky toward Long Beach. One Navy observer counted 9 silver planes in a searchlight, while another group told Long Beach Police Chief J.H. McClelland that they saw a second wave of planes through their binoculars. But were people seeing airplanes or something far stranger? Despite an abundance of eyewitnesses, whatever invaded airspace that night was only captured in one credible photograph. When it appeared in the February 26th edition of the Los Angeles Times, the caption explained that the image was taken above Culver City during the blackout. Now, according to the paper, the dots of lights around the central focal point were explosions generated by anti-aircraft shells. However, what lies in the center of the spotlight remains inconclusive and has fueled debate for over 8 decades now. In the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Los Angeles, confusion ran rampant. The media scrambled to find an explanation, but none of the military's answers could satisfy the numerous questions they raised. Newspapers ran headlines like, "Air battle rages over Los Angeles, LA area raided. Army says alarm reel, roaring guns mark blackout." A Los Angeles Times article on February 26th reported that the Army's Western Defense Command insisted that Los Angeles early morning blackout and anti-aircraft action were the result of unidentified aircraft sighted over the beach area. Now, according to the paper, 2 official statements confirmed and reconfirmed the presence over the Southland of unidentified planes. The second of the 2 was explicit, reading, "The aircraft which caused the blackout in the Los Angeles area for several hours this morning have not been identified." The article also listed 4 of the 5 casualties from the Battle of Los Angeles. 2 men had a heart attack, a state guardsman driving an ammunition truck, and an air raid warden. 3 others died in car crashes caused by all the aerial distraction, including a woman in Arcadia and Long Beach policemen. Several others were injured by shrapnel raining from the sky, which also harmed a herd of cattle. The question of the aircraft's origins lingered until the end of World War II. After their defeat, the United States government asked the Japanese to disclose what they sent into the U.S. airspace the night of February 24th, 1942. They insisted that, while they later sent aircraft over Seattle, they were not responsible for instigating the Battle of Los Angeles. Their claim was reinforced by the simple fact that any airplanes would have required an aircraft carrier, and none were reported off the coast of California that night. The revelation left everyone at a loss. The question had to be asked. If not foreign invaders, then what caused the military to pepper the California sky with anti-aircraft rounds? Witnesses on the ground clearly saw something up there. Was it simple misidentification, or were we under attack from visitors from another world? Was the United States military firing on UFOs? In the years since it took place, the Battle of Los Angeles has become one of the most famous events in ufology, overlapping with military history in a fascinating, verifiable way. Among many other reasons for its notoriety, the sighting occurred years before anyone even used the terms like unidentified flying object or flying saucer. The incident has even left a lasting impact on pop culture. It inspired Steven Spielberg to direct one of his few comedy movies, the 1979 movie titled 1941, and the film depicts a post-Pearl Harbor panic as it spreads through Los Angeles. In the science fiction genre, 2011's Battle Los Angeles loosely based itself on the 1942 event, which in marketing material was presented as the first skirmish in an intergalactic war between Earth and its extraterrestrial invaders. The historical record makes it clear that something spooked the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade that evening. When the night was over, approximately 1,400 shots had been fired. All told, about 9 tons of ordnance were used. Remember, this was just as America entered World War II, when ammunition became a valuable commodity to the war effort. It seems highly unlikely that the military would have expended so much effort on a simple case of the nerves. It also seems unlikely that so many rounds would have failed to hit anything. LA Times reporter and eyewitness Bill Henry wrote, "I was far enough away to see an object without being able to identify it. I would be willing to bet what shekels I have that were a number of direct hits scored on the object." Another eyewitness, a gentleman by the name of initials HG, would later go on to serve in World War II, expressed similar disbelief that the anti-aircraft shells failed to bring down the craft. He said this, "I remember distinctly the convergence of searchlights reflecting off the bottom of some kind of slow-moving objects, apparently flying in formation. They seem to be completely oblivious and impervious to the shells exploding around them. I was quite the aviation buff back then, as I am now, but I must admit that I had a devil of a time trying to identify the objects. What with the awe, excitement, and speculation of the moment, the bursting shells, tracers, etc., I was surprised in the days that followed to discover that with all the aggressive firepower, there was no evidence that we had brought anything down. I strongly remember the searchlights converging on the bottoms of the reddish objects flying in formation. Others also recall direct hits on the object or objects to no effect. However, a testimony like this has led many to speculate that the United States military did in fact successfully down an extraterrestrial vehicle that night. The story was little more than rumor until September 6th, 2000, and that was the day when former U.S. Marine and UFO researcher Timothy Cooper had acquired an envelope containing some shocking documents. Cooper received the envelope through the Freedom of Information Act. Now, according to him, several of the documents within suggested that something was indeed recovered by the U.S. military in 1942. The first document is a memo to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt from General George C. Marshall. It describes the events of February 24, 1942, unambiguously admitting that as many as 15 airplanes from some entity besides the United States flew over LA. Since General Marshall is still highly regarded 64 years later after his death, this disclosure from him is quite significant. The follow-up letter from FDR to Marshall is even more shocking. The president states, "I have considered the disposition of the material in possession of the Army that may be of great significance toward the development of a superweapon of war." FDR then instructs Marshall to proceed on the project without further delay. With the help of Dr. Vannevar Bush, some ufologists believe that this top-secret project developed the ultimate weapon of annihilation, the Sbarro sausage pizza. The third document from Marshall to FDR references unconventional aerial phenomenon, including the recovery of a pair of objects involved in the Battle of Los Angeles 2 weeks earlier. Now, the fourth comes from 2 years later. It is addressed from the President to the Special Committee of Non-Terrestrial Science and Technology, and is apparently a reply to a funding request, perhaps indicating a program to reverse engineer extraterrestrial craft. The fifth and final document appears to be a brief from Vannevar Bush to President Harry S. Truman on the program his predecessor had started. Bush tells Truman that FDR had in mind the non-terrestrial sciences, including biology and physics, and that the rewards of such exploration for the nation and the individuals are great. If the paper trail discovered by Timothy Cooper is authentic, it does represent a ufological bombshell. The acquisition of a craft in 42 would predate the Roswell incident by 5 years, making it one of the earliest alleged recoveries of extraterrestrial technology. I mean, there are plenty of skeptical questions to be asked, however. For one, we don't have any evidence evidence of a crash site. The location was long rumored to exist in the mountains around San Bernardino, but it has never been located. Those who believe that a craft was retrieved after the Battle of Los Angeles sometimes points to another supposed memo. It also comes from General Marshall, suggesting that the craft touched down not on land, but rather in the ocean. It reads, regarding the air raid over Los Angeles, it was learned by Army G2 that Rear Admiral Anderson recovered an unidentified airplane off the coast of California with no bearing on conventional explanation. This headquarters has come to the determination that the mystery airplanes are in fact not earthly, and according to secret intelligence sources, they are in all probability of interplanetary origin. Another problem worth addressing is whether or not the documents are genuine. While researchers like Stanton Friedman question the authenticity of some other documents that Timothy Cooper received, none of the red flags that they raised applied to these 5 documents specifically. To the contrary, ufologist Robert Wood compiled a list of 8 arguments in favor of Cooper's documents being real, including consistencies in file numbers between other sources and the language that each correspondent used. Reviewing the documents, noted UFO skeptic Philip J. Klass took issue with Timothy Cooper himself due to the researcher's involvement with the controversial Majestic 12 documents, whose authenticity Klass opposed as well. As evidence against crash retrieval, Klass cited a September 23, 1947 letter between 2 individuals, Lieutenant General Nathan F. Twining, head of the USAF's Air Materiel Command at the time, and Brigadier General George Shulgin, one of the Pentagon's top USAF intelligence officials. Now, the letter, which was declassified in the late 60s, explicitly mentions a lack of physical evidence in the shape of crash-recovered exhibits, which would undeniably prove the existence of these objects. Klass viewed this statement in such close proximity to the Battle of Los Angeles as evidence that no such debris was ever recovered. Of course, there is always the possibility or likelihood of a cover-up. Over the years, authorities have offered many denial and reversals. Skepticism regarding the official story began within days of the Battle of Los Angeles. An editorial appeared in the Long Beach Independent reading, "There is a mysterious reticence about the whole affair, and it appears that some form of censorship is trying to halt discussion on the matter." Of course, at the time, everyone was thinking the secrecy was somehow related to the war, but could it have more to do with extraterrestrial visitation? Navy Secretary Frank Knox denied that anything flew over Los Angeles, instead choosing to attribute the entire affair to war nerves and anxiety. Now, this seems highly implausible, given the military response and how many eyewitnesses there were. Some even come from the military and insist that there were aircraft in the sky. In 2004, a former service member told interviewer Holhauser that he saw planes, I assume they were, in very close formation, and they headed towards San Diego or Mexico. I remember counting 6 or 8. All they were spots in the sky. Now, in the same interview, another veteran said he definitely saw something circling above the city, perhaps an airplane. Even if a UFO wasn't brought down that evening in 42, we still have ample witness testimony to work from, all of which seems to indicate something other than simple mass hysteria. As noted, people saw everything from silvery planes to gigantic blimps. Others describe the object like red and white flares in groups of 3 red and 3 white, fired alternately, or chain-like strings of red lights looking something like an illuminated kite. LA Times staff writer Marvin Miles said that there was indeed something above the city, but his description was vague at best. He wrote this: "The object in the sky slowly moved on, caught in the center of the lights like the hub of a bicycle wheel surrounded by gleaming spokes." Eyewitness Scott Littleton saw something even stranger. From his home at 2500 Strand in Hermosa Beach, he and his mother watched what he described as a glowing object, which was caught in the glare of searchlight. "I don't recall seeing any truly discernible configuration, just a small, glowing, slight lozenge-shaped blob light. We only saw one object, not several as some witnesses later reported." Now, beyond these accounts, the photo that appeared in the LA Times is the only bit of tangible evidence we have for whatever instigated the Battle of Los Angeles. Does it seem to show anything out of the ordinary? Dr. Bruce Maccabee, argues that it just might. In addition to his interest in UFOs, Maccabee is an optical physicist and was even employed by the United States Navy. After performing extensive analysis on the photograph from the Battle of Los Angeles, he found several items of interest. Most notable, there seems to be something physical in the picture, though he cannot definitively conclude what it might be. Dr. Maccabee wrote, "The fact is that the beams basically do not get past the convergence volume, which is the volume of space, air, which is illuminated by all the beams. Now this indicates that whatever was at the CV must have been optically quite dense. If there was a lot of smoke whirling around the volume of air illuminated by the beams, I would expect to see variations in brightness where there was smoke and also swirls of smoke. Now the smoke does not stay neatly confined to the small volume where the beams intersect. Instead, the smoke spreads out in a random way and is illuminated outside the CV by beams both below and above the CV. But the lack of random smoke in the photo under discussion tends to contradict the hypothesis that there was nothing other than smoke at the CV. Now despite Bruce Maccabee's compelling observations, many believe that the UFO photo from the Battle of Los Angeles shows nothing. According to skeptics, what people might think is an object in the sky is nothing more than artifacts left behind when the photo was retouched, a common practice in journalism at the time to enhance the black and white contrast. Now this process involved such things as using ink to darken the skyline and paint to brighten the searchlight beams. Lens flares were touched up to represent anti-aircraft bursts. With so much manipulation involved, skeptics claim that any perceived extraterrestrial craft could easily be nothing more than a few accidental drops of paint. Since the photo is destined to remain inconclusive, let's turn our attention to other possibilities. Everyone involved in the Battle of Los Angeles took it very seriously at the time. Now this most likely means that they did see something in the sky, but what was it? Certainly not a commercial aircraft. If any had entered the airspace above LA at 3 in the morning, they would have instantly been brought down by the sheer volume of firepower hurtled into the sky. One possibility sometimes offered is that once the shooting starts, people began mistaking tracer rounds for the actual craft. I mean, this seems possible, but it seems like the rounds would be too fast and too brief to cause that sort of reaction, especially among military personnel who would undoubtedly recognize them. Now, another possibility is that flares dropped by who is anyone's guess might have been responsible for the initial sightings. Some witnesses eagerly compared the objects in the sky to flares in their descriptions. By far the most popular explanation for the Battle of Los Angeles is that ever-present UFO dismissal. The unidentified flying objects in the sky that night in February were, in fact, weather balloons. While this argument has become tired to most of us, it has some merit this time around. You see, wind conditions affect the trajectory of artillery. In order to prepare for this, it was common practice for regiments to release balloons to gauge the direction and speed of the wind should they have to open fire. Now, on the night of the 24th, everyone was on edge preparing for an assault. It was important to know which way the wind was blowing. We have it on record that a pair of balloons were released during this red alert period. One of them even held a candle to make it more visible against the night sky. The balloons were released at 3 a.m., the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade opened fire at 3:16. The timing is quite suspicious, to say the least. Other types of balloons may have been involved. In 2004, another service member serving as a radar operator at Redondo Beach recalled when he received the alert that a target was approaching that night. When the object came close enough, they turned the lights on, and it was a meteorologist balloon with a wavelength of wire tied to the balloon so that the radar tower would pick it up. Now, could these balloons, coupled with perhaps a faulty radar reading and mass panic, have caused the military response to the Battle of Los Angeles? Ufologist Richard Dolan admits the balloon possibility, but is quick to point out several critical inconsistencies. Now, according to his book, UFOs for the 21st Century Mind, sightings of something in the sky began around 2:45 a.m. 15 full minutes before the first military balloon was ever released. Now what's more, we only have records for 2 balloons. 3 if we believe that the other balloon was up there too, yet we have credible reports, some of which come from service members of up to 25 objects flying over LA, and in many cases these didn't resemble balloons at all. There's also Bruce Maccabee's work on the Battle of Los Angeles photograph to consider. I mean, if we trust his analysis, whatever floated above the city was far larger than a 4-foot wide weather balloon. And finally, recall the memo from General George C. Marshall to FDR, which made no reference to balloons whatsoever. I mean, even in light of all these facts, some people insist that nothing more than mass hysteria was at play that day. It's not the most popular explanation, but it still pops up from time to time. For example, in the 2004 Hull Hauser interview, one of the other veterans said, "I personally didn't see the planes. I talked to the Navy afterwards, but I was up here at the Korean Temple in the base ring of a caliber 50 gun that's still there, and the executive officer at Fort MacArthur, Lieutenant Colonel Snell, ordered me up here, and he said, 'Fire.' And I said, 'At what, sir?' And he said, 'Fire.' And I hope he's not living and mad at me. But there were no planes, and later on, there was a gun battery of the 203rd Coast Guard Artillery, and they were fooling around and one of their guns accidentally went off. So that started it, and everyone was firing." It's easy to see how an overzealous approach could have begun the Battle of Los Angeles. This was within 3 months of Pearl Harbor and the day after a Japanese submarine attack on California. Tensions were incredibly high. But perhaps the truth is somewhere in the middle. Perhaps the military response to whatever flew above LA that night in early 1942 was overkill, a time when fears of invasion snowballed into an excessive show of military might. As for what provided the trigger, well, your guess is as good as mine. It may have been balloons, it may have been enemy aircraft, part of a top secret operation still undisclosed by the Japanese government. Or maybe, just maybe, it was an extraterrestrial visitor caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But you know what? With all the information presented today, I want you guys to decide. So please be sure to go ahead and leave those comments down below. I would love to read them. As always, if you guys enjoyed today's episode, be sure to go ahead and smack that like and subscribe button for content very similar to today's. As always, guys, I love you all. Keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.